Hello everyone. Previously, we had discussed about or we were successful in designing a command prompt or the terminal. So today we'll be discussing or we'll be designing a tiny URL. So let's see what the question states and then we will be discussing about I'll just explain what are all the things that is needed and let's try to implement the same thing in the form of code, right? So the first thing they have asked is design a URL shortening service. We have to design a URL shortening service that basically generates a unique short URL for every long URL. So first thing that we have to keep in mind here is for every short URL, for every long URL, we have to uh, generate a unique short URL. First thing, and also maps the short URL back to the original URL. So this one we have to keep in mind. This is very important. So the second thing is it has to map the short URL back to the original URL, right? The second one. This is important. And the final thing is it has to include the functionality for expiration or statistics tracking. So this is optional they have given. Let's see what we can do here, right? First, I'll explain what are all the things that is needed and what are all the things that we need to consider, and then let's try to implement the same thing in the form of code, right? So the first thing is here we have to keep in mind that the short URLs should be unique and compact. So they have asked us unique and the short URL. We know that the short URL should be always unique and compact, right? Typically, it might consist of this one, alphanumeric. So again, I'm telling this is very important. Short URLs should be unique and compact. Typically, it has to be alphanumeric, and we can make use of the hash function or the database ID to generate the short URLs based on the ID of the database, or we can make use of the hash function as well to generate the short URLs. Again, this is the most important thing. The second one, we can make use of the hash function or the database ID to generate the short URLs. Second one. Third one, we have to keep in mind, we have to make sure we have to ensure the scalability for the high usage, right? So always we have to ensure scalability. In this case, for the high usage, we have to ensure the scalability, right? So these three things. What is the first thing? We have to make sure that the short URL should be unique and compact, and it has to be typically alphanumeric, right? The second one, either we can make use of the hash function or the database ID to generate the short URLs. And the final one is we have to ensure scalability for high usage. So these three things, right? So let's try to implement the same thing in the form of code. So as we are designing a tiny URL, I'll just consider the class named tiny URL. This is fine. Next, as usual, I'll be defining the constructor here. Within the constructor, initially, I'll just make use of your map, right? Let's go with the hash map. I'll just give here URL map. Let me assign this one to, or let me give here new map. Sorry. So, and I'll just make use of the variable name reverse map as well here. And let me assign this one to the map as well. So here we are making use of the hash map, right? If you are not familiar with the hash map, then please do go through my JavaScript playlist. So I have explained about the hash map and hash set. And please do go through the properties of hash map and hash set. So this is very important. Um, you'll easily understand what I'm writing here. So next, I'll just make use of the base URL, and let me assign this one to the initially to tiny URL website. So I'll just give here http tiny.url. It has to start from this one, right? So I'll just give here this one, base URL, and finally I'll just set the counter to 0. So initially, let me set the counter to 0. This is fine, right? I'll just come out of the constructor, and as usual, so let's discuss what are all the methods that we'll be using. So in this case, we'll be using encode and decode methods. These two methods are enough, right? So let's see the encode method first. I'll just give here encode of, let me pass the parameter here, long URL, right? So here, if this dot, let's make use of the reverse map, and we have the key of the long URL. So here we have already given long URL, right? So then what we can return here, let's see. I'll just return. We have to, if we have the key, we can get the value of the long URL, right? By making use of the get property. So I'll just give here a reverse map dot get of, let me pass the long URL. This is simple, right? This is the first condition. So next, let me go with the variable name short URL. Let me set this one to base URL. We are concatenating this one, right? And let me give counter to, let me make use of toString function. So I'll just give here 36. This is fine. Next, after this one, we have to update the value. So for updating the updation purpose, we'll be making use of the set property, right, in the map. So I'll just make use of URL map dot set. So what are the parameters that we are passing here? One is short URL. The second one is long URL. This is fine. Next, after this, reverse map, the same thing we'll be giving in reverse, right? So I'll just come here, reverse map again. So first we'll be passing the long URL, then we'll be passing the short URL. So this is fine. Finally, we will increment the counter as well as return the short URL at the end. That's what we will do, right? So let's increment the counter first. So this will be counter, and finally let's return the short URL. So here short URL, I'll just give in like this, right? I hope this is completely clear. This is simple, right? The encode, this one, encode method. So next, as we had discussed earlier, we are going with the two methods, nothing but encode and decode. Now let's go with the decode. So here I'll just give decode of parameter short URL. So I'll just give here short URL, right? So within this, this is easy. Let's return the value of the short URL, or if we didn't get any value, if there is some error, let's display null. Let's display null. So we cannot leave it as nothing, right? So we have to give something in the form of object. So I'll be giving, we can either go for the undefined or null. In my case, I'll just go for the null. So here we have to get the value of the short URL. So to get the value, we'll be making use of the get property in the hash map. I'll just give here URL map. So where is URL map? Yeah, URL map dot get to short URL. Or I'll set, if there is error, so we'll be displaying null. So we'll be giving null here. So let me format the document. This is it for the tiny URL. So we have successfully designed the tiny URL with the code, right? So we have to see the test case or the usage. So I'll just go with the test case. Here, let me make use of the variable name tiny. So this one is tiny. Sorry. Just give here, what is the class name I have considered? Tiny URL, right? Let me copy the same thing over here. Next, I'll just go with the short URL here. Let me give tiny encode. So here we are going with the encode. So we have to give the long URL, right? So let me give some random URL. I'll just give here https Bharadwaj example.com. So some random URL. I'll just give here very long URL, something like that. This is just for the example sake. I'm just considering this is nothing but the long URL, right? That we want to shorten. So finally, this has to start with this one, base URL. So what we'll do, we will log the short URL here. This starts from this one, right? HTTP tiny URL, and then we are going with the counter. So this has to display 0 here after that. So after logging short URL, I'll just go with tiny. Let's go with I'll just call the method decode. Within this one, let me call the short URL. So this one, we have to shorten this URL basically. So in this case, this URL will not get converted to the short URL. Basically, this URL itself is we are displaying whatever the URL that we need to shorten. This itself we are displaying. In this case, we are just going with this one. Initially, it has to start with tiny.url/0 counter. We are also displaying the counter. So /0 we will get. So here tiny, I am just calling the decode method here, short URL. This URL has to be shortened. We will not get the URL shortened URL, but we are just displaying this URL itself, right? So I hope this is clear. This is it for this particular problem. So I'll just format this one. I'll just give Control J. Let me give node. So let me copy this one very quickly. Just give me a second here. So we are getting error, right? So what error we are getting? Line number 24. Yeah, set I have misspelled here. So yeah, let me delete this one. Let me clear this one. Again, we are getting error. URL, comma, line number 30. So here again, why I have used comma here? So let me use dot here. This is fine. Let me clear this one again. So yeah, now we can clearly see, as I have said, we are displaying this one. Initially, it has to start with the tiny.url, as I have said, and we are displaying the counter as well along with the this one, tiny.url. So we are getting initially, this is giving us 0. We have set the counter to 0 here, right? So that's what we have written in the end code. You can just check the same thing, right? We have concatenated this one, short URL, this dot base URL plus this dot counter to string 36. That's what we have given here. That is the reason we are getting here tiny URL/0. You can clearly see. I hope this is clear. And this one is decode. So we have to decode this URL. So this URL has to be shortened, but we are not shortening. We are this is not the URL shortener, right? So we just have to design this one. So I'm just displaying the same website, long URL, this one, long URL. We have mentioned this URL, so we are getting the same URL as an output here. So bharadwajexample.com very long URL, this one. So I hope this is completely clear. We are getting the desired output. Now we know how to design a URL shortener like tiny URL. So I hope this is completely clear. Next, we will design the book my show, right? So for now, this is it. Thanks for watching, guys.